Hey there, crewmates! Gabe from Nexus Core here with another video. Sorry for the couple days of drought for content, but I am very excited to be going over this one because, to my knowledge, this is the first major large-scale event for the One Piece game that, as it has just come out this past Thursday. Over here we have the NX Gallery, which I believe is located in Thailand, and the event is apparently had over 150 participants, which I think counts as pretty a pretty large piece of data to analyze for what the upcoming meta is looking like. And as we can see here, we have the top 16 of those over 150 participants, and we can already see that this is a pretty diverse meta for what's at the top tables, and I think there are some surprises here. And I'm definitely looking forward to going over this in detail. And what I'm very happy about is the Facebook page for NX Gallery has actually taken it upon themselves to post the top deck list, so we can also go over not just what has been represented, but what people seem to be playing in each build, and uh, what each of these decks managed to place at. So as we can see, just from a cursory look, over about a quarter of this top 16, so four of these decks are played with Kid as the leader. Then three of the 16 have Zoro, and two apiece for Odin, Green Red Law, Blue Crocodile, and Purple Kaido, with only one deck in the top 16 belonging to Blue Purple Kaido. Now, uh, I consider myself pretty lucky because a lot of these decks were ones that I've been pretty excited about, and I'm very glad that a lot of them got in. I will say, part of me is a bit surprised. If you saw my leader tier list, I was kind of underestimating Kid a little bit. It looks like I think that I do stand pretty firm in that Kid as a standalone card is not super amazing, and I do think that's why he would be in the high B range for that. But I think what really will put him over the edge as to why he has this chunk of the meta is that the green toolkit is just so strong out of the gate, not just in terms of topping lists, but also the diversity of color lends itself towards green. There, there is one purple, one blue purple, so purple's up there twice. Another blue, so blue's up there twice. Red and red green, so red is up there twice. But in this top 16, there are three different green decks belonging to Law, Odin, and Kid. So every color has uh, it has two different decks to its name, assuming that each multicolor leader is two separately counted colors, and well, green has three, but beyond all of that, green is also in the top chunk. Even assuming we don't decouple red green law, green has four decks in Kid, two decks in Odin, and two decks in Law. So eight of the top 16 were represented in green. And based on this, I think some of this makes sense. Um, I think that blue was largely one of the weaker colors right out of the gate, which does seem to hold up here. Purple is, I think, one of the issues is people are still trying to figure out the purple deck list, whereas something like red is a bit straightforward because it has an aggro strategy. So I think this is a decent representation of what the upcoming meta is, but I do fully expect things to change. And what I am hopeful for is that maybe we get a bit more of a larger breakdown to see what everybody was playing to get an idea. And beyond that, I'm not going to waste anybody's time. Let's get looking over at everybody's deck lists. So, I am an American who only speaks English. I apologize to everybody who got this top 16. I don't want to undermine their accomplishments, but I also don't want to completely butcher their names, which is why I am leaving names and lists on the screen. So in this, first in the top 16, we have a blue purple Kaido list. I think a lot of this is what we expect. I think the Sentomaru package is pretty good, especially in a blue purple list. My own personal surprise is that they're running the only one of the blockers and three of the 6Ks. I would have expected, especially in a relatively aggressive meta where green is everywhere and red is also decently represented, you would have wanted probably to lean more on the blocker ends. Another thing that shocked me a little bit is people are electing to run ulti and page 1 as a combo. I personally was not a fan of it if you saw my build, just because you can't search out either of them, so you are based on hard drawing them. And if you don't hard draw them, I haven't found it to be that really that powerful. And also from what I've seen, I think most blue purple lists were not really running Onigashima just because it's so easy for you to get the Dawn back. But this player did elect to do it and got top 16 at a 150 plus event. So who knows what I'm talking about. Other interesting ones are the decision to put in Doflamingo and Perona. I think this is pretty interesting as an idea because as this purple does not draw a whole lot outside of Queen, being able to at least know what you are drawing into is certainly a good idea. And if anything, it is added consistency for the page 1 and ulti as well. If you would draw into a Pacifista before you get sent tomorrow, you could at least prevent that from happening as well. Because the deck doesn't really draw, getting to your big hitters like the King and 9-drop Kaido, if that is like the 5th card from the top, you can make it the first one, and if none of them are there, you can just get everything to the bottom and hopefully get it closer from there. So I actually do like that as an idea, and it actually makes me kind of want to run that in my own build. And another thing that we see in this list is they are not running the 10-drop Kaido, that is the board wipe. I think this is the right call, personally. I do not really think, I don't really care for the 10-drop Kaido. I think it's very heavily costed, and because you have to spend all of your Dawn, you couldn't even give it to your leader to get anything back, so I think it's too much of an investment, whereas the start deck one I think is completely fine. As well, other things that I'm a bit shocked by is the selection of counters for the events. They're only running 3 of Borrow Breath, which is a 1-drop 4, which I am a bit shocked by. They're running, I believe it's Desert Spada. I am the least familiar with blue on the color wheel. That is counter 2000 and also sculpt the top 3. I think it makes sense, and it adds not consistency, but at least you know what you will be getting into. You're not getting the cards, but at least you know you can get to them, which is still decent, and only 1 copy of Overheat. I think this is a decent list. I do have some things that I probably would change personally, but I think overall there's a lot of good theory here. I think seeing success with the Sentomaru package in Blue Purple Kaido, as well as a Perona and Doflamingo and some general sculpting in the blue range is definitely helpful for a Kaido list to both ensure that you're drawing the big ones when you need to and not when you don't want to. So I think this is a solid baseline to work with. And next we have the start deck mono Blue Crocodile, and this seems to be, I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not totally sure what I'm looking at. I would have expected something like Raw Baroque Works, but this seems to just be powerful event turbo, and you just want to use events to hold out the game until you got Mihawk to push in for game. And and as well, there's a full Sentomaru and Pacifista passages, with 8 of them involved, and quite a few blockers and more sculpting. So I'm going to be completely honest here. I really don't know how to decipher or think about this deck. I would love it if anybody in the comments could explain to me what this is going for. Maybe if the person who topped with it is somehow in the comments by sheer coincidence and is able to explain the theory. I am genuinely curious, but as I am still not super well versed in the game beyond a couple of games on Untapped here or there, I really don't know what I'm looking at. So I'm genuinely curious to see what this was supposed to look like. Next, we have our first kid list, which is pure, I think it looks like it is pure Supernova, and this seems to be largely unchanged from the start deck. I believe this kid is a promo. Let me zoom and see if we can tell. We cannot tell. I'm not totally sure, but a lot of these are from the start deck, which it's very interesting to me that there are as many holdovers in the start deck as there are. I think this does make sense because Bonnie helps you search for the 8-drop kid, which is absolutely insane. The 8-drop Kid, I think this deck definitely makes sense because it's all about ensuring that 8-drop Kid, your opponent can't get through it. You have the 7-drop Kid, which can attack for 7k, and if it has a Dawn, can untap itself to block. So you effectively have a 7k blocker to be able to even try to hit the 8k. If you block with it and that kid stays untapped, you have Paradise Tokutsa to, or Paradise Waterfall, I believe. I don't even know why I tried the Japanese, to give it that same kid 2k and then untap a blocker. And you also have, I believe it's Punk Gibson, which gives something 4 and rests an opponent's character for 4. So this is definitely all about both multi-attack, getting the 8-drop Kid on the board and keeping it alive while your leader Kid really just starts to beat face and getting a lot of multi-attack. I think this list definitely makes sense. I don't know really if there was anything I would personally change. I think a lot of these are very solid choices. I think there's plenty of blockers to ensure that Kid is never going to leave. Yeah, I really don't know what I would tweak. Most of my green has been in red green law, but this is a list I do want. This is a deck that I do want to try out. So I think this is a solid list. I'm a big fan. Next, we have another green Kid list, and we can see that it is quite similar. Notable differences is there is one extra copy of the 8-drop Kid, just to ensure that you see it. As well, they are running the Romance Dawn Diaz Drake, which I'm not sure uh, if that might really be the right call. I feel like if we're getting into that territory, there might be other cards that I think I would want to run over Drake. I just don't think KOing something, especially something with only 4, isn't that great. And while of course Kid will make it easier, this deck does have a pretty decently high mana curve because even 1 to 3 is fine, but there's 4 4s, 4 8 12 5s, and 3 8s. So I think I I I'm a bit hesitant mostly on the Drake and the Hawkins, but I do like Hawkins a little bit more. But I think there's a lot of this is a very high cost character build, so I think I would probably, and there's also no Bedge here, which seems very strange because I feel like this deck you would want to keep the 8-drop Kid alive. So that is something I'm a bit hesitant on. But also, if anything, I think it really just goes to show just how impactful having a Kid on the board is. And if you are able to get 2 on the board, your opponent is just going to be miserable. I have been in that position, and it is horrendous. Next, we are on to our first red-green law list. Now, I think the first thing that strikes out to me here is they are electing to run Kid. I do think part of why I think that's interesting is that because the red-green law only lets you go cheat out a character with 5 power, so Kid is out of that. And also, Kid is an H-drop, and if you want to use his effect to redirect, you're going to need to tap him with his own effect and give him a Dawn for a total of 9. So the turn you play Kid, you would not be able to use Law's effect even if you had 5 on the board. But that's the first thing that I noticed, and other than that, I think it definitely there's also, well, actually, this is the thing that's, oh wait, sorry, this is the original art. I'm so used to using the alt art of the Romance Dawn Searcher Nami that I didn't even notice it. Beyond that, though, I think a lot of this makes sense. You run 4 8 9 blockers to help Kid out at 2 or less life. Radical Beam becomes 4, that can make Kid 12. You run another 4 blockers in the form of Law, and then if Kid is on the board and it stays on the board, the next turn you just keep Kid and then just do normal red Law aggro shenanigans. So I think this is an interesting list. I'm very interested in the decision to run this Kid, and yeah, I also do like the inclusion of running Chopper just because it's a blocker searchable off of Nami. And different from my list, if you watched my video, is they did elect to not run the in 2 years at Saba Odin searcher just for added Straw Hat consistency. So I'm curious about that decision because I know that card's been a bit contentious, and they're only running 1 Luffy. So this deck does kind of seem to be at least a bit more dedicated to a defensive package with Kid and also just relative aggro. Also, what I think is interesting is I forget the name of this card because it's all in Japanese and I don't run it personally, but this is the one that gives an opponent's character minus 10k, which I think is solid for matchups where you are running against Kaido where they have giant guys, or honestly the Kid mirror where if they had their 8k Kid on board, at least making it 0 can make the situation mildly helpful, a lot more helpful, because this deck definitely has issues hitting 8k, and if this is going to be a player in the meta, I might probably lean towards running that myself just for this specific matchup. Next, we have our first pure Zoro list, and I think this list definitely makes sense. I think I'm not going to undermine. I absolutely refuse to undermine anybody for the decks they decide to play, especially because this person managed to top. But I do think that a mono red list is just generally the most straightforward to build. You got your low to the ground characters. You got the things with rush just to hit as soon as you can. There's a decent control suite in this as well because they are running Robin, who is quite powerful, as well as I believe this is Jet Gatling, which you can just KO something as well. So if you want to get some get rid of problematic cards, they're there. There's also the decision to run Shanks. I believe this is the secret rare version, so I'm going to hazard a guess, and that might be part of why, because if I pulled the secret rare, I would absolutely just shove it in my deck. But I think this definitely makes sense, because you have the Nami Searcher, you have the Zoro Searcher, you got the 5-drop Rush Luffy from the start deck, Robin. The only thing I'm really surprised by is the lack of in 2 years. That seems to be a very, very contentious card all across any red deck that goes into Straw Hat. The next list is another mono red Zoro list. Now, this one I think is also general. This one I think there's a decent amount to speak about. They did decide to run Uta to salvage things, and I think that makes sense because it's also a decent replacement for the in 2 years, because while you are not seeing the card, if you have already seen it, you can get it back if it's been trashed. There's the decision to run Diable Jambe, which I think also makes sense because I feel as though this deck definitely has an issue overcoming high-statted blockers. I know because in my Law deck where I have a 6-drop Law as a blocker, this deck can have some problems with that, even if Zoro is able to pump them up. I'm very torn on this just because, again, Kid is a player in the meta, and Kid technically doesn't have blocker, so that doesn't really solve that problem. But I think it's an interesting addition. But again, we see a lot of common themes. We have Sanji who gets rushed, the Nami Searcher, Chopper, Control Robin, Rush Zoro, Rush Luffy. I think, as I said, there's a lot of overlap between these two lists, so I think this is a relatively solved deck. Save some slots here or there. Next is, again, another Zoro. So Zoro, I think all of the Zoros made top 16, which is kind of interesting to see how the rest of the list goes. And I want to point out that I have not looked at this list in full yet, so I don't know what a lot of the places are. So I think it's kind of interesting that Zoro did take place 3 of the top 16, but they only made it to top 16, and they all got knocked out before quarterfinals. So in this deck, they're only electing to run 3 of the Searcher Nami, which I think is very interesting. I feel like if you're, and there also is no in 2 years or Uta for that matter. So there's a lot of things about this list that, for full disclosure, I'm not the person to talk about for mono red in general and Zoro specifically. But there's a lot of things here that I am kind of curious about, like why there's only the 3. There's there's no Uta or the in 2 years for the which feels weird for the consistency. So this is one that I'm definitely the most puzzled on, and also the decision to run a full 3 Diable Jambe after my qualms from the last list. So this one I do is kind of curious to me, but again, it still made top 16 out of 150 plus events, so it's definitely doing something correct. I just can't see it because I'm a noob to this game. Next, we have our first mono Purple Kaido list, and this one, again, first thing I notice is they are still running the ulti and page 1 package, so I might have underestimated that. Maybe just their raw stats that you can get really is what puts it over the edge. But on top of that, they are electing to run both King as well as the 10-drop Kaido, and this made it top 8. As well as the Brachio Bomber, which is a very heavily costed event. I am very curious about some of this about this list just because this is a very high to the ground list. I know it's purple, so it gets to the high numbers quickly, but the issue with that is because so many of these are above 5, you could only play one of them anyways. Like the turn you play Kaido, you're not doing anything because there's not a single one drop besides Borrow Breath on your opponent's turn. If you played Queen, you're not playing any of these cards. So there's a lot of cards here that, because they're so high to the ground, is what gives me a bit of pause, especially because it's in mono purple. It would, maybe if it was in the blue purple one where you could recycle knocked out cards, then I could understand it a bit better, but if anything, there is the jack to discard thing, so if you do brick on high drop costs, so that's the one thing that really does give me the biggest pause, but I think to some extent it also kind of shows how solid of a cards the 7 and 9 drop King and Kaido are, just being able to take out a lot of things and hit for high numbers. That this is a deck where, unless you get a really strong early game rush in, it will really overpower you just with all of the big numbers. So if anything, maybe that's the reason why they were in mono purple, just for the one extra life. But if anybody has any suggestions, again, please let me know. But yeah, I am a bit concerned about the high Dawn drop for this deck. Next is another mono purple Kaido, and this one, by my own personal taste, is one I'm a little bit more comfortable on. It's still relatively high in cost because you do have a solid amount of 4s and 5s, but it does ensure that you can at least play two pretty solid cards in the same turn. The thing that really interests me the most is, again, we're seeing the board wipe Kaido, so maybe I was completely wrong, and I can kind of see the justification in that, because it's a red and green meta that will fill up a board. If you get to the point where you can play that Kaido, it can really swing the game in your favor. My piece of contention is having to wait till that point to begin with. And again, we're seeing Brachio Bomber, so it looks like this meta, or this area is very in the idea of triggers, because I've seen a lot of the ones that, in the people that I've spoken to, are not running cards like this just because they, even if they have trigger, because Brachio Bomber is very heavily costed. But I think Brachio Bomber is solid just because it can hit some 6 drops like the Green Law, so it's definitely a targeted choice. I'm a bit concerned about the decision to only run 2 copies of Borrow Breath, but with Higurashi and Black Maria, that makes sense, and a bit of ramp from Thunder Baguio, I guess, can back it up. So yeah, this is one I think I would personally be a bit more comfortable with than the previous list, because it is a bit more in the mid game, and Kaido's big drops do tend to stick on the field. In my experience, a lot of people don't go after them, so I think this, there's some things that do give me a bit pause, but I think a lot of this, we see a lot of things that are very obviously powerful. The preference for SR King and start deck Kaido, you got Who's Who, of course. The decision to run Jack, I feel as though not a lot of people have been doing, so I think that's interesting, as well as running Higurashi, just because it's a low to the ground blocker, which I think the deck definitely does need. Next, we have our second mono blue Crocodile list, and this one also seems to be in just a general 7 Warlords build, with quite a few in the event category as well. It's one that's definitely going to want to pause until you get to Mihawk, because it looks like they're running 6 copies of the blocker Pacifista. So this deck really wants to grind the opponent out. You're going to get all of these blockers. You have the Boa that can let you draw. You have Law. So that's already 14 blockers, 6 of which are searchable. Another 3 when you added Doflamingo. You have you have strong counter events. You can return something of high cost to hand. This is definitely another tanky build that you're gonna just it's not a stall deck, but it's one where you're gonna really want to slow your opponent down and just kind of grind them out while they can't get past your blockers. I think this makes sense for mono blue. Next, we are on to our first Odin list. Now, again, the first thing that is obvious is Kid. I just think that Kid might arguably be one of, if not the single strongest card in the game right now, just because the 8k stat line that forces your opponent to attack into it is very, very powerful. The other thing that I'm interested in is only running two copies of Komurasaki. I was expecting people were going to want to run more multi-attack. I know cards like Raizo and Kiku, they can only use their own attack ability once during the turn, but just to be able to reuse attacks, I felt like people would have valued more. But you also have cards like Izo and Cat Viper, which can reduce stats. You have Momo, which is the Wano Country version of Bonnie for consistency. You have Kinemon, which is great because he can cheat out a card from hand and attack. You have the start deck killer, which I think makes sense because both it's a trigger, but also a lot of the deck in green and red have low to the ground cards, so just being able to hit them can be super helpful. Again, I think if you've watched more than one of my videos, you would know my feelings about Yamato, which I do find the most questionable, just because it's a 5 that so it can't be restood by anything that restands, and it doesn't have rush, and it's only has 5 attacks, so it is absolutely getting blocked unless your opponent just made a bit of a misplay and they saw Yamato and decided to tap out anyways without having blockers. So I'm very inspired by this card. But again, like with the other Pure Kid lists, they're running the both Paradise Waterfall and Punk Gibson, which are good protectors for Kid also. And then you have both Bedge. It looks like Bedge is the only main deck blocker just for that because you're gonna want the consistency in Wano. So, yeah, I think this definitely makes sense. The Odin, I feel as though is a lot. I think a lot of the monocolor lists are largely solved, save a couple of slots here or there, and it really is the multicolor ones where people are really getting experimental with, which makes sense. Next, we are on to the top four, and I think we've only seen one kid list up to this point. So unless we'll find out if I'm wrong, but it seems that top four had 3 kids. Which, if that does wind up being true, wow, this is going to be a hellish meta. Again, first thing we notice is the obligatory 2 kids. I do think 2 is the magic number because if you're in the Supernova list specifically, you have Bonnie to make it searchable, but also, while having 2 kids on board is a absolute brutal position for your opponent, having 2 of them in your opening hand is horrendous for you. And then other things we notice is they're running 2 of Drake, which I do think makes sense over 4, just because hitting the difference between hitting a 3 and a 4 I have found is not super impactful, but it is another card that you can just free knockout with against a mono Red Zoro. You have other cards that are just generally strong. You're only running this list is only running 3 Bedge, but they are running 4 of the killer that can give you a draw if it has a Dawn on block. They are also running the start deck law, which lets you restand, which just gives you additional multi attack. I think that provided you are able to keep Kid on the board, if this is in hand and the other kid is on board, just being able to swing with the 7K kid twice, or 8K once you give the Dawn twice, and then still keep it up to block for the next turn is just brutal for your opponent. And yeah, I think this, again, like I said, the mono lists are pretty solved because a lot of these are pretty solid choices. There's nothing, I really wouldn't run more than 3. I might want to run a second copy of the Stark Deck Kid, just because even if you don't have the SR Kid, having a 7K turn it into an 8K that untaps itself as a 7K blocker just seems quite good, and being able to reuse that with the start deck law just seems too good to pass up. But this seems like a very solid list, and it definitely is what we should come to expect from most kit lists. Next, we have our next Odin list, which is this is I think a lot of this is quite similar to the last one, but they have elected to run Inu and Ashura Doji. They're also deciding to run 2 copies of the SR Law. This one is the one that interests me the most, just because I think being able to reuse Killer if you see it is solid, and being able to reuse Cat Viper's power reduction, and same with Izo, is part of why. But beyond that, I just don't know if the deck needs to take advantage of it that much. But if anything, being able to use those against the Kid Mirror is a solid justification, and it's an additional 6K blocker. So I think I do like the idea of running this in Odin. I think I do have some in my own list that I've been working with. But a lot of this, the thing that surprised me the most, and I just noticed, or not noticed rather, is that this list decided to not run the one drop for Komurasaki to restand. So this seems like definitely a more tanky version of it. You get your draws off of Raizo, get some decent control with power reduction. You have plenty of blockers because it's 4 Bej, 4 Killer that also gives you a draw, and then 2 copies of this Law, which is 6, and then the what we should expect from the green event line. These are some very strong events. So I think a lot of this does make sense. So yeah, I am a bit hesitant on 3 Kid, but I think because they're not running Bonnie as it's not pure Kid, I think 3 might actually be the right call just to guarantee seeing it. And now we are on to the runner-up, which is the green red Law list, which makes me happy because I do love this list. And I yeah, I think a lot of this is from things that we are really expecting. It is a very strong red, green, good stuff because we're running 4 copies of the Searcher, Nami, and Bonnie, 4 Bej because getting creatures out on early in the early game is what you want to be doing with Law. Running Chopper. I have played with the idea of running Chopper, as I mentioned in my profile, so I do like that. I think it's something I'm going to definitely consider a lot more, considering how many of these lists we've seen have been doing it. They're running 4 copies of the Rush, Zoro, and Luffy. It makes sense. They're running 4 copies of the Luffy that can give itself Rested Dawn, which is good for it being a beater. The only order or event rather, they're running is Paradise Waterfall, which seems a bit concerning to me. I think it's solid to block with Law, make it an 8K, and then restand it, which is probably the justification there. But I just love the 4K from Radical Beam, so that's something as somebody who has experimented with this deck quite a bit, I'm concerned about. I also did not think about running the Sanji. I am unsure of that as well, so I am curious about it, but if anything, it is another Straw Hat target for Nami to see. I would probably, I think in given the upcoming meta that we have so far, where a lot of it is very low to the ground things, I would probably start wanting to run more copies of Killer just for the effect. And if anything, looking at this kind of makes me want to start running Robin just because of how many low to the ground, low cost, low power characters are in these topping lists. So I'm definitely going to consider running Robin in my build. And the winner of the event is the Mono Green Kid. Now this deck is deciding to run 4 copies of Kid. So screw what I said about the last list, I guess. That seems very bold, especially because it's searchable off of Bonnie, but if anything, it pretty much means you'll have a Kid every turn the moment you hit 8 Dawn, so that kind of makes sense. They are also running 4 copies of Drake. It's hard to tell because of the glare, but I know the posture, so I'm sure of that. And then 4 of each of the laws, but they are not running the other Kid that restand itself at the end of the turn. That is I'm not sure about that, but I mean, it got the first in the event, so that might be something worth considering for this list. And then other things that we should expect. You're never running less than 4 Bonnie. You probably shouldn't run less than 4 Bej. 4 Killer because the draw for a single Dawn is solid and it's a blocker just to piss off your opponent while you have Kid on board. Izo, I think, actually does make sense just because you can hit your opponent's Kid in a mirror match, which is definitely something that you're going to want to at least make your job easier because you have things like Punk Gibson that gives 4K. So even if so that would make Kid 12, and I think making it down to 10 is a bit more manageable. But also you have restanders, so you could either attack and use Kid skill or just attack with Kid twice. Actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know offhand because it isn't in English. I'm unsure if this law lets you restand any supernova or if it has to have a specific cost. I might just be too used to the 5 cost from my red law list. But either way, being able to restand solid cards and being able to just wall up with Kid is just so devastating in a lot of matches, and I can actually understand why this list had made it to the top. So congratulations to everybody that made this top 16, with a special congratulations to the winner of the event. And now I just want to do one final wrap up just to look at what we have here. I'm going to double check to see if they have posted everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So they do post everything. So this, there was nothing missing. So if you want, you can scroll back to earlier parts of the video to understand and look at any list that strikes your eye. I think a lot of this definitely makes sense. As I said, the thing that I find the most surprising is Mono Blue making it as far as it did without being Baroque works. I felt like that was the list people were going to go towards. But, I mean, I guess the events that they have and things like the Sentomaru package are just so strong that they're able to do it. I think this makes sense with a lot of games as it is early days, both in terms of the game itself, but also the release date of the most recent pack. So a lot of aggressive builds making it there are to the top or up there, especially. And I mean, it's hard to say aggressive because Kid is an 8K wall, but it's also an 8K wall that can attack on its turn and still be a wall. So this, I think what's really interesting about this is beyond just hitting high. This deck is aggro in that it hits high, almost unblockable numbers, while as other ones just have a lot of low to the ground quick attackers, which I think is quite interesting. But I think if anything, this really just goes to show how powerful the green toolkit is, and it doesn't even need to be the green toolkit. It just needs to be Eustace Kid himself, because wow, was that card the powerful one to have to deal with. The only thing that can auto kill it, I believe, is the 10-drop Kaido, because the 9-drop from the start deck only hits 6 or lowers, and Kid is an 8-drop. So I think Kid having the stats it does is a very strong makes it like kind of what you would expect in the anti-meta, but it also is the meta. So I think this is what I am very happy to see is that this is also a very, very diverse meta. Some games can start with very unhealthy positions of just what the best decks are, but we had what, 4 start decks, and I believe an additional 8 leaders from Romance Dawn, I believe offhand, for a total of 12 or so. But in the top 16, we have 7. So this is a pretty diverse top 16. So to some extent, you really can just pick what character or color you like and probably do something well with it. And I do think that actually does make me quite happy with how this game is starting. I really hope that this does, as the meta really begins to cement itself, does not change. I am somebody who actually does like a defined meta, and I'm not somebody who is anti-meta as a concept by the virtue that I'm making this video, but I don't really want it to be a meta where there really are only 3 or 4 viable decks, and I think the fact that there are all of these have had there are only one Blue Purple Kaido snuck its way in, but every other list got 2 to 4 of top 16. So I think just the sheer diversity of this first week of the game is something that's frankly heartwarming, and it makes me really happy that not only is it a very healthy meta and start to the game, but also the game's been out for 5 days, and we already have people who have enough people who have completed decks to have an event with over 150 people, which just absolutely warms my One Piece card game fan heart. So this was a very long one. I hope you found something interesting here. And what I would love if you stayed through this far is if you know any sources for me to go over different tournaments to do the meta analysis. I love going over the meta and seeing what works and what doesn't and why. So I would love to see as many of these high profile events as possible and be able to go over them with you so we can keep a track of the meta together. But with all of that, I am going to wrap it up. So thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.